telling you, we're going to do a compilation of these things.
We got to start off with that music. Like that sinister music. Like, anyways, guys,
if you're listening on radio, you need to watch the podcast.
Just get on YouTube. You'll see it. All right. Guys, welcome back to Self-Evident Podcast. You got Massey, you got Mike.
Nope.
We are.
Because we are.
We're that POD song, Youth of the Nation. Youth of the Nation. Yeah, what are you doing?
I don't know.
What the heck? What were you doing for the last hour?
I don't know. We did not set
Good
this up.
night.
It's our producer's fault.
I'm not even in the middle. What the?
It's our producer's
what in
fault.
the world? Anyways, guys, so if you have not subscribed yet, go to these up. Man, this is crazy. TheSelfEvidentTruth.com. Guys, again, this is a pre-recorded show, so if you guys can, go ahead and share this, comment where you're from, give us a thumbs up, all that stuff. We're trying to put up new content, so we have our podcasts on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. So we're doing a whole plethora of things for you in content. So we're going to keep bringing out content. We actually have a new show on Wednesdays. It's the
Conspiracy Vault.
The Conspiracy Vault. So we're going through different conspiracies, different things we probably all have questions about. Last week we did the did we land on the moon? Just because I wanted to know. Not because I'm serious about this, but because I want to know. So we pull out some facts and different things and things people have said and basically called NASA liars.
Yeah.
And, so
I think Bob's still on the moon.
Bob is there. And if you don't know who Bob is, check out that last podcast. That's right.
We break the story of Bob.
Bob
cameraman.
is the unsung hero in this whole story.
Is.
Bob is the unsung hero. So guys, again, TheSelfEvidentTruth.com. We're on BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, everything. Subscribe, get on SoundCloud. That's a huge platform. What are we on? 27. No, we're on 27 countries now, 27, 28.
Something like that.
So the message, and they're constant listeners. They're not just, fly-by-nighters. So it's really cool. And today we're going to talk about the truth about race. Is racism still existent? Yes. We can all agree with that. That's not even the question. Is it just to say that racism takes more place over lying? No. Government lies all the time. And we're not as crazy as we are about racism. I'm Hispanic. I've experienced racism. It exists. It's called hatred. It's called sin in man, all that stuff. But when Colorado can pass a bill that says you can abort your baby 7 days after it's birthed, and here we are talking about that the most important issue in this nation is race, I'm sorry, I don't agree.
Right.
They're all important because of the sinful acts. They're all important issues to tackle, but I don't think one has precedence over the other. So let's talk about slavery. Let's talk about all these things. And Mike, why don't you go ahead
and to segue on that, when we decide that race is the ultimate issue, race is the most important thing, what we're really doing for ourselves is we're ignoring the facts. And so one of the things that we're going to be doing in this whole podcast for this hour is we're going to go through the facts of, okay, was racism and slavery the two factors that determine where the Black community is today?
Ooh, that's a great question.
And even the Black community admits they're in dire straits because these Black leadership, the white allies and all of them say, well, it's slavery and racism. You know what? They're admitting the problem.
Yep.
So don't come at us and say, you guys are racist for saying there's problems in the Black community. You admit it through your own actions.
Yeah. And they do it through omission too. And then they admit it through their confusion.
Yeah.
That the government created fatherless. That could be true. But the fact is you still have fatherless communities.
Right.
Okay. How do you rectify that? This is what we're saying, church, Black, white, Hispanic, whatever. We shouldn't even have a color when we're talking to Christians. This is not even about that. Right. But people in the church, we should be the ones preaching against this, that if government is doing it, it was John Adams that said that the pulpits need to preach the issues of the day. Right. And so if the issue is this whole narrative of fatherless homes, which to me is a greater sin, you know what I mean? Why aren't we talking about that? And if government is actually doing that, if it's government, why aren't we preaching about that?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
To go after these issues.
And one of the biggest things that especially the left progressives point to is saying this was great for the Black community is Civil Rights Act, the expanded welfare state, all of that. That's going to be kind of the focus of this whole podcast.
You know what's funny? Listen to that. That welfare was great for the Blacks.
Right.
That's really what they say. It was great for the African Americans.
It really is. It was.
So you're
so
saying,
needed.
yeah, you're saying that they can't do for themselves. That government needs to be there. Oh my gosh, guys,
That's what drives me nuts.
Buckle up.
And that's one of the things that we said. Look, what frustrates us the most is that the Black community has so much potential. It's the progressive policies that have been put in place that have devastated the Black community. One of the most devastating, and this is our lead into this whole thing, was Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society program.
Yep.
And we're going to cover LBJ because you got to understand the source of the policy, the source of the issue.
A lot of crap happened during LBJ's time. I mean, others too, but LBJ was just a weird. Yeah. Look at his. Just look at his. Look at his face. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It just says.
Just look at his face.
Well, and I think it's important to know the man. I mean, if we're going to point to these progressive policies as being exactly what we need, I'd like to know the source and understand the motive behind the source. Sure. Because that tells you a little bit about whether the programs were well thought out and doing what they need to do,
or if they're constitutional.
Right. Well, and that's
the question of the ages, right?
Right. Which I think people would know how both of us feel about that.
And if do you think the founders didn't know what they were doing? That if government was going to provide for the people, it wouldn't make them paupers and servants. Then that's not what they wanted. They wanted free, liberated men to rule their own houses the way they should. You know what I mean?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't it Davy Crockett where they were going to?
I'm glad you brought that up.
They were going to
pass
a law or something, or pass a donation to a woman, right?
Yeah, from the Treasury.
From the Treasury. Yeah.
And I'd have to do more story digging, but I've heard the story many times, and forgive me, I wish I'd have brought it here. But what ended up happening was Davy Crockett was the one who basically was like, "No, we don't do that." So he passed his hat around to get the donations for the lady, not to pass a bill for the welfare side.
And that's how it should always be. That's how it should always be.
Jeez, dude,
is out of your voluntary kindness, not out of the force of getting other people to make your payments for you, right? So LBJ, he was not a good man. I'm going to say that. That's really all I have to say.
Break it to him slowly, would you?
And in case you think I'm being biased, I want you to know the two sources that I used for going through LBJ's, some of the examples of him, MSNBC and Salon.com.
If you have not, and we're not encouraging you to go to Salon.com, but it's pretty nasty.
Yeah, it's
disgusting.
It really is. They're the ones who defended a pedophile. So.
Yeah. So we're using them, right? It's like using wickedness
to show wickedness.
To show wickedness and justify righteousness. It's crazy.
And so you can't say, well, you guys are taking conservative. No, these are very progressive sources that are even talking about who LBJ was. So just a couple of examples. In discussing the tension-filled, short, and brutal relationship between LBJ and MLK, Salon reports from Andrew Young, who worked with King. There were ugly scenes in the Oval Office late in the war-ruined Johnson administration when the president, in one of his Texas-sized towering rages, referred to King as a GD N-word preacher. I could say one word.
Why didn't you say all that? It's written.
Because I don't want to get shot.
It's because he's white, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, Massey, can you read that quote for me? I can put you on the spot.
Oh, man. It's literally written out almost fully. And it's like, I didn't know if you were going to say it. I was like, I'm waiting.
I got guts, but not that much.
So Johnson said that. A GD N-word preacher. He called him that.
Yeah.
The Democrat.
The Democrat who is fighting for the rights of minorities.
Who magically signed in the Civil Rights Act. Magically.
So when Dr. King delivered his speech at New York's Riverside Church about LBJ's Vietnam misadventure, they officially became bitter enemies. By that point, Johnson wouldn't even talk to him and often referred to him in the most vulgar and derisive language imaginable, as referenced in the previous paragraphs. Right? King, everybody saw King as having pure motives, right? Noble, honorable.
Not perfect, but
not perfect.
Sure, noble.
But clear conscience in what he was doing.
Sure.
LBJ, everybody saw as derived merely from his desire to create a contrived presidential legacy. So he would talk about how the legacies of Washington, the legacies of Lincoln and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which I don't.
Yeah, FDR's got his own.
To me.
Yeah, FDR's got his own mess.
And that was LBJ's driving force. That was exactly what he wanted, was to be one of those legacy presidents. And it wasn't just, so I'm going to do the best or do the right. It was, how can I manipulate and engineer things to make me look like the best possible? That's your Civil Rights Act.
That is.
And he went as far as to stonewall Kennedy's attempt at Civil Rights Acts. He had all of his buddies in Congress stonewall the thing so Kennedy couldn't get it through, so that when he became president, then he could do the 180, turn around, and pass the Civil Rights Acts. So you're telling me this is good? Like this is this, and granted, progressives tend to see it by means or ends justify the means, right?
What that was? I was like, what was that? It was my hand. I'm sorry.
But I really get concerned about when somebody's putting forth a policy or a directive, but their heart's not right about it.
Yeah, but that proves the power of man. This is this gets it kind of becomes rhetorical for us to say. Do you see the importance of the Constitution? Putting it in the hands of one man, which was never intended to happen, right? Mm-hmm. Granted, the Civil Rights Act passed through Congress, whatever, right? But then one man claims the victory, not the people, not the Congress, not all that stuff, right? It's one man. And that's what happens when we put one dude on a pedestal, right? Washington was a great man, not because he was a good president, but because his character was that of a good man. Mm-hmm. Adams, good man. His character, was he perfect? No. Wasn't. He had his flaws as president too. Right? Washington was said to have Hamilton had his ear. You know what I mean? Hamilton was a warmonger. So it's like they all kind of had their flaws, right? But the conduct and the character of the man is what made them the men. It wasn't them being president that made them good and noble and righteous. And the people were the ones that got the victory when government ran well within its bounds. It was the people that were free and liberated. That's what happens when we put one man on a pedestal.
And I'm glad you point that out, because if you compare Washington to LBJ, because everybody will say, well, Washington was flawed. He owned slaves.
Let's get into that. Yeah.
Yeah. However, nobody questions Washington's heart. Nobody questions his character, his morality. It just doesn't happen unless you point to, well, he owned slaves, so therefore he's an evil, wicked man. The difference between him and LBJ is there is a litany, a massive body of evidence that he was not a good man.
Yeah. And it's hard to argue culture. You know, when Washington had slaves, that was the culture of the time, not justifying it, but that's just what it was. Yeah. Right. And then nobody knows, but in Virginia, he had freed them when I think it was his first wife died or something like that. He had to inherit them, and then he ended up freeing them. So like, there's all these things that happen too that we don't ever hear about, right? He was just a slave owner. Guys, that was culture of the time. That's just everybody. What nation didn't have slavery?
Right.
That's just what it was. Nobody's saying it was okay, but that's called national sin. Let's turn around. You who are saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're justifying Washington. Tell us some national sins that you think are national sins right now, especially you in the world. Aren't you guys the ones saying right now that, oh my gosh, the LGBTQ community is the one under terrorism. They're not treated equally and fairly. That's a national stain, right? You may believe that. I don't mistreat gay people, but y'all think it's that big of a deal that we got to push it on little kids. I think that's a national sin, that you're trying to use school systems to push gay agendas on kids and transgenderism. I think a national sin is abortion. When New York can pass bills the way that they do and aborting babies after they're born, Colorado, right? These kinds of things, California. I mean, that's wickedness to me, right? Wickedness is, here's another national wickedness, that the federal government has become as big as it is. That is a national stain. That's a national sin. And we're turning back and looking at them and saying, we're more righteous than them. Get out of here. Get out of here. You have no right to speak against them when you yourself know that within you dwelleth no good thing, the Bible says. You have no right. accept Christ. And if you do have Christ, you know what you have? It's something called compassion. Dude, I was not there. I don't understand what it was like back in those days. I can't just call out the wicked, but praise the righteous. That's what we got to do, you know?
And speaking of what I would call wicked, furthermore, Caro was told by a former aide to Johnson that there was never anything altruistic about Johnson's motives and that he had no real empathy for any of the causes he espoused, certainly not the civil rights of minorities, whom he disparaged and ridiculed. There's even conversations of how he treated his driver. He wouldn't call him any human names. He called him disparaging racist names.
God.
So I wanted to cover LBJ first, just for you to get a little glimpse of who this guy was, right? Because this is our history lesson for the week. You got to understand this stuff.
Did you read that line where he said, I'll keep them voting 200 years?
No, I didn't.
You got to read it.
You read it.
Okay, so smart man. So one of the many statements that demonstrate his personality or demonstrate who he was. I just want you to hear this. And this is actually recorded in explaining why civil rights bill had become so important for him. Here's what he said about it. I'll have them N-words voting Democratic for 200 years. When this is passed, they'll love me so much they'll be voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
He was right.
Was he right or wrong? Now, you know what's really cool that the media isn't showing you? Hispanics, blacks, whites are now all turning to the side of righteousness in the Constitution. Yeah. They're coming out in droves now, guys. Churches are standing up. I can't remember where it was. We just shared it on The Self-Evident Truth. 50 pastors ran for local office. Yeah, we just shared a big article about that. If you guys not gone on there, go to Self-Evident Ministries Facebook page, Instagram page. We're all over the place, and I'll show you real fast. So you don't think I'm lying to you. I know we got to go, but just
no,
give me a second.
Good. You're good.
Just
I
give me
was
a second.
just curious where we were at.
So I want you guys to see this. It's a few posts down. They're doing okay. 50 pastors run for local office in North Carolina to restore righteousness. 50 pastors run for local office in North Carolina. 50 pastors. 50. Whether they all win or not does not matter. It means that 50 stinking pastors in North Carolina saying they want to restore righteousness in the public square. 50 listen to that. Guys, if you don't think wickedness can be absolved, if you don't think that, I hate this website. It's got all these pop-ups, and now I just went to another thing. It says, just real fast, they want to restore righteousness in the public square. It says our goal is really 20 pastors in 2022 running for local office, but 50 of them stood up and said we want 22 of them to really win, but 50 of them did it. 50. What if Martin County did that?
Right.
50 ministers of the gospel saying we're going to go run for public office. Looks like the hot button's on me right now as a pastor. You as a pastor, right?
No.
50. Listen, dude, can you grasp this? 50 leaders of churches said we're going to stand up and go run for local office. We're going to run for public office.
And you guys need to shout that from the rooftops.
Golly!
Pastors and other churches have to hear about this and say, oh, why aren't we doing this? Right? It starts somewhere and those fires grow. Now's your chance. You should take that as all encouragement and you should blow that from the rooftops. We've posted it. Share it. Get it out there. And I sound like a broken record, but it's because it's so simple to press click.
Yeah, dude. And what if that encourages your pastor to say, man, it's finally time for me to get involved? 50 pastors did it in North Carolina. It's North Carolina we're talking about.
There's no reason pastors can't wake up.
No reason.
Right? So let's get to some of the stats. Did the Civil Rights Act and the Great Society program really do what they say it did or intended to do?
No.
Has it? Let me just ask this. Has it really brought the Black community to a better spot than where they were? No. And so immediately the reason trotted out is, well, slavery and racism. Isn't it funny that the programs failed, but we'll blame racism so that way we don't have to worry about whether or not the programs failed? Because if we admit the program's failed, then all of a sudden we have to say, well, then why are we still doing these programs?
It's like the new Speaker of the House for last 3-4 years through coronavirus. Everything is racist. There's like clips of her saying it's racist. Fox News is racist. The right is racist. Racism will always be racism. She gets up when she gets nominated as Speaker, the press secretary, and she says, "I am a Black immigrant gay person." Right?
Yeah.
All three of those, because of the advances that have been made in our nation, right? So I'm here. It's like, but you just said racism.
Yeah.
But you just said there's no way we could. But you know what I mean?
Right.
They do. This is where it gets. You can't keep crying that word, and people aren't going to feel it anymore. You're crying wolf at this point.
That's, I think, one of the reasons everybody thinks Colin Kaepernick is just a laughing stock at this point.
Dude, Antonio, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You know, he called the NFL a slave market, being poked and prodded and pinched and all of that. Yet now he's begging for a position back. He's saying, look, I'll take a backup spot, man. I'll earn just let me back in. What slave was raising his hand going, can you bring me back to the slave market? No, I know you took my chains off, but I really want to go back there.
Yeah. They're slaves, and most of them millionaires. I mean, there's some who aren't for sure, but most of them millionaires, right? But Antonio Brown came out and said, this dude got all these favors and money from the league, and it was no longer about the issue. It was about position. So he took a Nike deal. He took all these things. Yeah. If it was really about the issue, he wouldn't have taken none of that corporate money. No. He said he became corporate. I was like, good for you, Antonio. Good for you. I mean, I'm glad for real. That. I mean, I'm not saying he's the most, he's got his issues, but it's like,
he was right.
He's right. I think you can't keep crying this narrative, right? And then be BLM and go buy. Didn't they just get busted?
The narrative to the
right?
To the bank.
But didn't they just like got busted again? They were giving money to family members. They were giving. Yeah. Did you not think this was going to happen?
What a sham! And a scam. Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson. These people are making bank off misery. Al Sharpton will never come out and say we won. We're good.
That's exactly it.
He'll never come out and say that.
That's exactly it.
He cannot.
He can't, because then it destroys their credibility. It destroys everything that they stand on, right? Everything that they're doing. It's like pharmaceuticals. You notice that nothing's ever fixed.
No.
Nothing's ever cured.
The drug cures the thing but causes side effects, so you better get another drug to cure those side effects. Well, that causes a couple other side effects, so get another drug. All of a sudden, you're on 5 drugs.
So nothing's ever fixed through government.
No.
It only
adds problems.
It's only appeased, but then it adds another problem because we're running out of money, so it creates inflation. Yep. You know what I mean? Oh, this is crazy.
So let's get into these stats, because this is something that maybe you haven't been able to put words to on how to argue this, how to talk about this with family members over Thanksgiving, because of course you're going to be the one to bring it up, right? Please don't. I know liberals like, you need to bring this up at Thanksgiving to get back at your Trump. Just let family be family. You don't have to get divisive.
Could you just not?
Yeah.
Have some turkey.
Right.
Don't
put in the comments.
Have
your
some
favorite
turkey.
Thanksgiving
have
food is.
Have some turkey. Don't be a jerky.
Okay. So
that was stupid.
A lot of this information I got from Thomas Sowell. So if you have questions or debates with the data, bring it up with Thomas Sowell.
That's right. Hey. A black man, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Just to throw that out there.
Him and Walter Williams seem very intelligent, very successful, very well established, yet they're not part of the liberal machine.
They're not liberal. They may be liberal in the classical sense.
Yeah.
Which is a good liberal, but like
they're not progressives. Go figure.
Yeah.
So Sowell reports New York Times writer Nicholas Kristof asserts that there is overwhelming evidence that centuries of racial subjugation will still shape inequity in the 21st century. He mentions the lingering effects of slavery. This is the argument that they all use, is that slavery and racism have put the black community in the position they are today. So what we have to do is decide, does the evidence show that they were improving?
Good point.
And they got worse, or it's continually gotten worse?
That's good.
What's going on?
Right. If it's going to continue, shouldn't these programs have worked already?
Right.
Over the last 50 years?
So stop for a second. This means that if the Civil Rights Act and welfare programs were effective, they would have increased the progress of the black community, right? Remember this question throughout this whole podcast.
Remember this.
So Christoph cites a study showing that counties in America that had a higher proportion of slaves in 1860 are still more unequal today. Christoph's other overwhelming evidence of the current effects of past slavery is that blacks do not have as much incomes as whites. Now, Sol responds, Puerto Ricans do not have as much income as Japanese Americans.
I love common sense. I love that kind of thinking, man.
He said Mexican Americans do not have as much income as Cuban Americans.
I love this kind of thinking, dude.
I do too.
That kind of like, oh, that was so good.
He continues. Guys, did you know that despite the passage of civil rights law, war on poverty in the 1960s, the fact is the poverty rate among blacks fell from 87% in 1940 to 47% by 1960. Do you see that drop? Poverty was halved in less than 2 decades. Or 2 decades.
Yeah, there's a guy named Dr. Umar. I think we've talked about him a little bit. He's really on the black bent, like the men
Black
are kings.
Power.
Yeah, Black Power. Men are black men are kings.
Oh, okay.
Queens are we've talked
kings. Stuff.
Yeah. And it's but he had these statistics that he was throwing out he was on, I think it was the Breakfast Club, it was a podcast there. And he was spitting up facts about before the civil rights legislation, before Lyndon Johnson, the industries that blacks were in didn't require college degrees, but they were well-paying jobs.
Yes.
Skilled trades, welding, plumbing. You were taught the stuff out of high school. The streets were industrious. But then this thing happens. They start closing down those industries in those areas. The government did. Mm-hmm. So, that's coming from a black dude who is fighting racism, who says the whites are terrible. And, not all whites. I'm not saying he's saying that. And I got to be careful. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm saying is he's saying racism still exists. It's hot and heavy, all these other things, and how government has destroyed the inner cities. They weren't even supposed to be called inner cities. They were just thriving cities. He said it was nothing for your dad or your mom or your grandpa to have jobs like this. Yeah, racism still existed, but they were still thriving and industrious. And so again, when it fell from 1940, 87% to 47% is because of those industries. Those industries were carrying these people.
Yep. And there's actually and I don't know where it went if I took it out of my notes, but there's a discussion about construction workers in the South were black. You didn't have white construction workers. And so they were highly used construction workers, and they actually started coming north. And the companies would send them north to get government contracts, but they were underbidding the northern companies because the northern companies had unions and that kind of thing. And so they passed laws saying that the government had to pay the union wage, no matter whether it was a union bid or non-union bid, right? Which cut blacks out and took money from their pockets.
Yes.
So we said 87 in 1940 to 47% by 1960. Over the next 20 years, the poverty rate among blacks fell another 18 percentage points compared to the 40-point drop in the previous 20. So the first 20, 40-point drop. The next 20, 18-point drop. In the 1960s, so this was slower rate of progress, but it didn't finish, right? That's very important, because you had this awesome progress going. And if that poverty is dropping by half in 20 years, that's generational wealth being built.
Exactly.
But then in the 1960s, all of a sudden that progress gets halved.
Dude, I mean, if you think about it,
slows down.
Yes. And if you think about modern thinkers now, people are getting smarter, right? Thank God. We're starting to kind of pick back up. Guys like Kevin Hart, Kanye West, Shaq, all these guys who are black leaders, kind of black I don't want to say thinkers, but leaders that are successful. A lot of them now, rappers now are coming out saying, yo, I can't buy that $100,000 thing if I ain't got 30 million in the bank. That's what my reps are telling me. That's what my bankers are telling me, my accountants. Kanye came out and said, instead of going out and buying foreign cars, all these other things and diamonds, buy a piece of land. America's for sale. Teaching now, like, leave your kids something,
right?
Have some wealth in your life.
Build wealth.
Yeah, build wealth. Shaq, he's worth $400-500 million, right? Because he bought into how many companies?
Yeah,
right. And he's teaching, like, dude, these things happen because I want to build wealth. I want to be wealthy, right?
Yeah.
That's not wrong. That's not unbiblical to do. And they're actually now saying, but this is what they were happening. And then all of a sudden there was a decline.
Exactly. Going forward in some of these stats, so most Black children were being raised in two-parent families in 1960. 30 years after the liberal welfare state, the great majority of Black children are being raised by a single parent. It's something like 70 to 75%. That's 3 out of 4
Wow.
are being raised by a single parent.
Wow.
You cannot build
Wow.
generational wealth on a single parent home.
And not because the single parent is bad.
No.
But there's two things. One, you do need that male figure in a daughter or a son's life. You need someone to teach them how to have that protection, work ethic, how to be, you know what I mean? Someone that a young girl could say, I want my husband to look like that, right? One, so that they're not falling into bad relationships. The second thing, that second person adding an income helps build wealth.
Yeah.
It helps build stability in the family. You need that. That's biblical.
And the argument that slavery and racism tore apart these families, and that's why the Black family is so devastated.
Yeah.
The facts don't bear it out.
Exactly.
Because if you look again, I'm gonna say this again. Most Black children were being raised in two-parent families in 1960. And did you know the divorce rates before 1960? The divorce rates were actually lower in the Black community than they were in the white community.
Wow.
But now everybody's getting divorced, right? But it's I want to amend that. Like divorce is more prevalent than it used to be.
I was gonna say, not everybody.
Not everybody.
I'm not thinking about it. So
another stat, the murder rate among Blacks in 1960 was 1/2 of what it became 20 years later. And this is after all the liberal law enforcement policies. You saw a breakdown of the family and the community in the 1960s. The stats, I've got more stats and we'll get to them, but the stats bear it out that something happened, that the progress stopped, and all of a sudden things started going backwards.
I wonder how many of those like crimes and murders are done because of thievery, because of stealing, because when you build,
they'll even claim that. They even claim that.
So I think, and this is for every race. This is for every person. This is for people. When you create a nation who's emotional and covetous, they'll do anything for it, especially if they don't have the Lord. Again, read 2 Peter. It talks about they become brute beasts. They just become natural in thinking. That in that context, I was talking about Christians who leave the faith, or not even Christians, but people who know the morality and don't have it. Right. Well, when they're raised in church as kids, all of a sudden, when they get older, they're like, screw it. They become covetous. Then they start doing these things. It's just how our society is being raised right now.
And Sol talked about like the housing projects. People always argue, well, it's because they're living in the projects. Did you know the projects were actually, they used to be something that people had pride in their projects. They had pride in their community. And Sol claims public housing projects in the first half of the 20th century were clean, safe places where people slept outside on hot summer nights when they were too poor to afford air conditioning. This was before admission standards for public housing projects were lowered or abandoned in the euphoria of liberal non-judgmental notions. It was before the toxic message of victimhood was spread by liberals. We know what hellholes public housing has become in our times. The same toxic message produced similar social results among lower income people in England, despite an absence of a legacy of slavery there. So he's pointing out in England, it's the same situation with public housing. So you can't say, well, it's purely a racist thing. That's why public housing is so bad here in the U.S.
Right.
Now, what about slavery? Racism caused slavery? Slavery has existed for all time.
Yeah, this is like not a new concept. Like, matter of fact, it's existed even before the New Testament.
It's very early.
Very early. Very early. That's just a common thing.
Every civilization has had
and
some
nobody
type of
nobody justifies it. We all know it's an ill.
No.
Nobody's saying that, right? Because even God's children were created as not created, but they were led into slavery a lot of the times, and God bailed them out, right? So it's not the issue. The issue is slavery has always existed. It is not America exclusive.
No. And in ancient times, you enslaved people near you, right? So this race thing is very recent, and there's actually a good reason for that. Not a good reason, but a valid explanation for why racism grew in this whole slavery situation. Ancient times, you enslaved people near you, right? The Europeans actually enslaved the Slavs. Where do you think that name came from? Enslaved the Slavs before they finally started going to Africa. Now, mind you, the Ottoman Empire was almost, well, I shouldn't say almost all, but a big number of whites as well as Africans. The Ottoman Empire was a massive slave market, very organized. They were brutal, though. They were absolutely brutal to their slaves. Not that we weren't brutal, but
somewhere
in degrees,
yeah.
Ottoman Empire was a lot worse. Now, one of the issues is the ethos of America was all men are created equal. It's hard to justify your sin unless you find a reason to clear your conscience, so to speak, and justifying the sin.
Exactly.
So what they said was, oh, well, they're a different race. They're not human, basically. You dehumanize, that way you can just, it's the same thing with abortion. It's not a baby, it's a fetus.
Dude, Hitler did it with the Jews. He dehumanized them, right? Stalin did it with his follower, Pol Pot. It was the princes versus the paupers. You know, the serf and serfdom, right? Like, what is it? How does that go? Serfdom and
feudalism.
You know, but it's like the prince and the pauper, basically. Yeah. So like, it's you dehumanize people, it becomes the launch pad for you to rule them if you dehumanize them, and it's a constant thing. This isn't anything new. That phrase, "all men are created equal." What if we did this? What if we turned it on its head and said it was Thomas Jefferson's vision, along with all the others, to speak life into this country? We believe all men are created equal. We don't see it now, but it will be. We can do this.
Yeah.
Right? The vision was we can absolve this crap. We can make this a new nation. We could do something that's never been done before. That the start and the inception of this nation could be free from slavery. Now, there was a compromise and stuff like that, but dude, what other nation did that? What other nation at that time was saying we need to free all people, make all people equal because God said we're all equal? Name another nation. We had the guts to do it. Now, have we failed? Of course. But we were the ones with the vision, right? How come we're not? You don't see Christians going over and protesting Rome and Italy for saying, you persecuted Christians. Oh. For years, you led them to the slaughter. You threw them in Colosseums and destroyed Christians. Why? Because it's not there anymore. Because, yes, dude, there's Christians. There are people that hate Christians everywhere. We're not talking about how bad China is to Christians or Iran or Iraq. We don't talk about it, right? You don't see Christians protesting, right? Not that I'm saying they should or shouldn't. What I'm saying is they're not doing it. Why? Because we're looking to reform society. So instead of, I'm going to make a bold statement. I believe for a lot of people, blacks, Hispanics, whatever, they're using the racism card for a platform. It's to get their name.
It's the
moment you cry racism, it's like Republicans. I'm endorsed by Trump. Bam, puts you right on a pedestal. I'm America first. They're using all the buzzwords, right? Because that's what people understand is the buzzwords. Because in this society today, we don't look into anything anymore. We just like buzzwords. It's called tribalism, right? So racism has become the platform and launching pad for many. They don't even know what it is. Like, how many cops were killed by black dudes last year? We don't talk about that. Was that racism invoked? No, it's because, they felt... No, you're missing it. The cop got murdered, okay? Justify it. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is what we're doing is we're taking these buzzwords and we're allowing these things to happen. Slavery was not exclusive to America.
No.
That's my whole point. Slavery was not exclusive. It was exclusive in Africa that had slaves, Chile, Brazil, right? Europe,
the whole Caribbean.
Yes.
Slavery's been everywhere. And this, I've said this before, Brazil imported millions.
What was it? You said 4.5 million, right?
It was 3.5 to 4 million. The U.S., 300,000.
It was like, yeah.
Yet it's our original sin, and nobody ever mentions Brazil.
Jeez. Nobody talks about the indigenous people that were here before, that were enslaving people, that were hurting their own,
enslaving each other,
that were slaughtering their own, their other tribes
and the colonists.
We nobody talks about that. Nobody.
So the difference between income between Western Europeans and Eastern Europeans is greater than it is between blacks and whites in the U.S. You can't tell me that slavery and racism are the sole reason that the community is in the condition it is today.
Wow. Great point.
Now, if slavery were the number one cause, thank you. I had to sneeze out the crap that I'm getting from.
He's getting rid of wickedness, Lord.
Yeah. Thank you, Lord. So slavery would have put them at the bottom then, right? Hispanics have a lower per capita than blacks. Sorry, guys.
What are we doing wrong here?
Sorry.
We just
Now-
we weren't on the ball.
Hispanic household and families have higher income than black household and families. Why? Hispanic families are larger. And Massey will tell you, because I'm going to use the race card on Massey, Hispanic families, they tend to stick together and the income goes towards the family, right, Mass?
Yes.
Yes. You get a lot of them in a little car and they all go to work and they come back and then they all give their money to the family.
Yes. We love America. We love this country. That's bad, but it's true. I was raised that way. When I was living at home,
Your money wasn't your own.
No,
right?
man. I started working when I was 14. I was doing some like early morning bussing, like cleaning tables and stuff like that. It was allowed back then. It shows you how old I am. And so we did that. And then when I turned 15, I worked at Subway. 16, I got a full-time job. I started working. All my money went to my parents. We put it all in one pot. They paid the bills, right? I was taught family. I was taught how to pay bills. I was taught how to take care. I was taught there was none of this free stuff and your money's yours. None of that stuff. And I'm glad, guys, I'm not mad about it. My dad taught me so much about how to take care of my family that it worked for me. So I don't do that to my kids right now, but I know I'm teaching them principles like tithing and all these other things. But I'm glad I did what I did because it showed me that life's not about me. It's about when I have a family, my wife and kids and things like that, they come first. God comes first. So I'm put on this earth to provide and to build and to build wealth for others and to have a business and create something for people. So I'm so glad that looking back on it, dude, best lessons I were ever taught, because all of a sudden I'd get money. I'm like, it's actually not mine. It's actually, my parents. My white friends were all like, dude, that's ridiculous. It's your money. And it's like, no.
It's family.
It's family. We take care of each other.
And that devotion to family was actually prevalent in the black community.
Absolutely.
Right after slavery. So the fatherless family is not a legacy of slavery. Here's why.
Right.
It's become much worse for families much removed from the era of slavery than families closer to it. So what do I mean by that? In the 20s, you found that married couple families were much more prevalent among blacks than today. In the 20s. Now, if we're going to argue about times when racism was rampant and all of that, the 20s are not removed. The 20s weren't a perfect paradise. There was a lot of racism in that time, but black families stuck together. And guess what? Black families were building and creating generational wealth. They were making progress. You look at other marginalized, to use your own word, communities, the Jews, the Chinese, the Irish, the Italians, they stuck together, they worked hard, and they've built great things. The Jews are a perfect example.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was a lady at her office or something like that said her grandfather was like a millionaire and he was a janitor in New York. And he became a millionaire.
There you go.
Because he just invested it right, probably had some properties or whatever, but it was like, a janitor became a millionaire. Yeah, it's called being smart investing.
Right.
And left his family some inheritance.
And guaranteed he learned some of those lessons from family, from peers, from mentors,
or from hardships
community.
where they came from in Italy or whatever,
Yeah.
wherever they came from, Sicily. They came from that hardship and they said, I'm coming to the land of opportunity. I better save up and store. Plus, going through the depression taught a lot of people things.
Yeah, absolutely.
That dude, we can't just when your outgo exceeds your income, your upkeep will be your downfall every time, right? So,
I like that.
Yeah, I've heard that from a one from me. Quote Massey, unquote. No, but I know that when they went through that, it really hurt them. It hurt a lot of families. How many people probably committed suicide? Businesses were gone. Stocks fell. Yeah. I mean, it's time to penny pinch. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And blacks in the 1930s actually had a lower unemployment rate than whites did.
Oh,
that was in the 1930s. Again, a time of massive racism, much closer to slavery, yet they had lower unemployment rates than the whites did. Their families were more intact than the whites were. They were making progress. And you saw that progress between 1940 and 1960 when they halved the poverty rate. As they were building and establishing themselves into industries, which take several generations to really start to take over an entire industry, they were doing that. They were making the progress. What makes me so mad about what happened in the Civil Rights Act and the welfare state is you just killed their progress. Because what happens is all of a sudden you gave them a reason to not keep being industrious and work hard.
Exactly.
And not just blacks, everybody.
Yeah, but even the welfare state's happening now. Remember, look how many jobs are available now and people won't work.
People won't work.
Because they're getting the money from the government.
Right. So the welfare state moved forward as well as that mindset grew because there is no stigma attached to being on welfare. That's important too.
Oh.
You didn't see that in the Asian communities. Why? Because there was still a stigma attached to taking welfare. No, you work for what you get. You go to school. You go to college.
Create a business. Something.
Do something.
It's yours.
And now Asians outperform whites.
That's funny about Mexico, Asia, like parts of Asia, Japan, whatever. A lot of those little side businesses that you see walking up and down the street, they're taught, go make your own money. So they pop up little stands.
Yeah.
Make their, you know what I mean?
Yeah, make your money.
It's ingrained in them to
hustle.
Exactly.
Hustle.
Go make your money. Be industrious. Go be an entrepreneur. That kind of thing. Mexico, same thing. A lot of these houses in the front, they have like little shops.
Yeah.
People come in there and just buy stuff. That's how they make money. You know what I mean? You're taught that.
And you're taught that in lands that it's much harder to propel yourself forward through that process. So then they come to America and they have that same mindset of hustle and grind and all that.
Yes.
America is a land of opportunity. So then they really do grow generational wealth. They really get themselves out of poverty. Capitalism has brought more people out of poverty than anything else, by far, bar none. Let's go to graph 1 because let's talk about illegitimacy. So illegitimacy is
graph 1.
Graph 1, slide 1. There we go. Now notice the graph starts in 1964. Notice that. What happened in 1964?
Civil Rights Act.
Imagine where those numbers would be 100 years before that. Or sorry, 50 years before that. Heck, even 100 years. Notice the increase for all of them. Notice what happened in the black community. Isn't that line much different from the Hispanics and the whites? And the Asians mirror the Hispanics and the whites. Asians are probably more flatline than whites are. Notice that explosion. Today, blacks are over 70%. Hispanics are over 50%. Whites are around 30%. So what happened was the income, the lack of income in the black community, they were susceptible to the messaging of the welfare. And guess what? The welfare messaging was pointed towards the black community. LBJ proved that. He proved who he was going after.
Which, what's crazy? You got to wonder, like, why the blacks were so targeted. Because, like, Margaret Sanger and, all these guys, like, it was that community that was super heavily targeted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To be stopped or whatever. It's like, gosh, man, what was it, Lord? What happened there? Because we're not saying it's illegitimate to say that racism existed or exists. We're not saying that. But we're saying, look what happens when government gets involved. It gets worse for you.
I've wondered about that, and I kind of wonder if there's like a spiritual aspect to the power of the black community, because like the faith of the solid black church is
they move mountains, dude.
Right,
they move mountains.
So I've always kind of wondered if it was one of those things of like Satan has attempted to keep them mired and held down, because as a community, as a people, like that power of faith. I mean, let's be honest, the European church is kind of drab for the most part.
I mean,
and you look at, we have our pockets, right, and everything.
Sure. Always.
But you look at Europe today, the church, there's not a whole lot of life.
Yeah, virtually non-existent in a lot of ways, right? I will agree. And if you're really honest with yourself, the amazing accomplishments and talents of those like George Washington Carver and all these guys, like Frederick Douglass's, dude, they're great minds, great thinkers, super talented. And yeah, I mean, every time I've ever stepped foot in a church, that was predominantly black is, dude, you walk out of there going, man, like I said,
mountains.
yeah, like Second Samuel, man.
Yeah.
By my God, I'll run over, leap over a wall and run through a troop. It's like, dang,
So let's go with a little more stats. There was a dramatic increase in blacks with college and postgraduate education preceding 1964. So prior to World War I, fewer than 5,000 college degrees had been granted to blacks in the history of the U.S. By 1935, that had increased fivefold. By 1947, black colleges alone granted in 1 year more degrees than blacks had ever received in all years prior to the First World War. Now look at how education is treated in the black community. And I'm going to be honest, because I've heard this personally. Education in the black community is treated as being white. You're trying to be white. That's your number one way to cut yourself off at the knees.
Yeah. Agreed.
Like, education was moving forward. They were beginning to perform, right? The rise of blacks out of poverty was greater in 2 decades preceding 1960 than that of following, and education was major in this, guys. In 1940, non-white males averaged just 5.4 years of schooling, white males 8.7. Over the next 2 decades, the absolute amount of education increased for both, but the gap between them narrowed. So it did increase and the gap narrowed, which means blacks were progressing at a faster rate than whites were. 1940, the difference in schooling between black and white males 25 to 29 was 4 years. But by 1960, that had shrunk to less than 2 years.
Come on, dude. They were getting there.
This is what drives me nuts. That the whole welfare, Civil Rights Act, all that. Now, the Civil Rights Act, as far as discrimination and all that, let's have that conversation another day. This stopped them in their tracks. And that's why we're throwing you guys all of these stats, is to show you it stopped them in their tracks. They were making progress.
Yeah, I think too, because it was like government telling the people, you must do this now, instead of just letting them do it. Now, should we have stopped murder? Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. Of course they should have. Of course, there was elements of this that were hugely needed. I understand all that. I do. But overall, it has this whole welfare state stopped a lot of communities. And even now the Latin communities fallen into it, for a little bit. It's like not for many. There's a lot of lot of my brothers, you know what I'm saying? Now my homies. Rancho. No, I did not grow up in the hood. I grew up in Sleepy Eye. North Sleepy Eye represented. No, I know my family worked as migrants, a lot of those, but the overall welfare system has destroyed minority communities.
Yeah. In 1970, so you may say, after the Civil Rights Act welfare, what were the stats then? By 1970, the poverty rate among blacks had fallen to 30%. Okay, so it went from 47 to 30%.
47.
So about that 17, 18%.
17, 18.
10 years later, with affirmative action now put in place, poverty rate among black families had fallen to 29%. You in 10 years, you dropped 1%. What happened, guys? We put all these policies in place. We put affirmative action in place. Even if you attribute this 1% decline to government policy, it doesn't compare to the dramatic decline in poverty among blacks when the only major change was the rise in their education. That's a big difference.
It's true.
Man. And education, I want to quick point this out. So let's go to slide 2. This graph is mathematic performance. Now that's since 1973. You notice that gap?
That's reading.
This is reading.
Yeah.
So you had a little bit of a condension. They were narrowing the gap in 1990, and then it kind of fans back out, right? But you notice the stats that we were given before of educational performance, years of education, were getting better, and they were narrowing the gap. And now it seems like, everybody's about the same for the past. That's 30 years of representation.
Yeah, and that's 2004.
Yeah,
that was back when the goals 2000 and all that stuff was starting to come out. The No Child Left Behind stuff.
Yep.
So like, even if we were to do scales now, stats now, what are you basing it on?
Yeah.
How well they can read, transgender stuff,
right?
And understand. I'm serious.
No, you're right.
Or actual critical thinking type material, which was back then.
And the education system, just as a side history, was modeled on the Prussian system, which the Prussian system was build soldiers, build a fully submitted citizenry for the power of the state.
Yes.
Not critical thinking.
The government-run school system from the inception, was demonic. Because it just, they wanted to destroy their faith in the family, faith in their nation, all that stuff. So it's from the beginning,
So we should be ending this. Give me 5 more minutes, because the whole jobs thing, blacks couldn't get jobs early on, therefore they were poor. In the South, black construction workers were much more common than in the North up into the 20th century. In the South, blacks were the construction workers. Whites were employing blacks because it was profitable to do so. Racism stops where the dollar begins.
That's right.
That's shown in South Africa too, where during apartheid, the laws were very explicit, yet blacks were getting hired more than whites were, and blacks were progressing faster than whites were.
And they were, I mean, it was not just profitable because they were lower wages. They produced. They worked hard.
And a dollar finds a way. So you can be racist, but the dollar will end up mattering more to you than the race will. And so a law was passed in the 20s. Notice government got involved. A law was passed in the 20s to stop this as the Depression got underway. Construction companies in the South had used black non-union labor. They would come up north, underbid the government contracts, and take those contracts away. This was so common the Davis-Bacon Act was passed. This meant government contracts had to pay the prevailing wage, which translated into the union wage. So all of a sudden, those Southern companies with those majority black workforce weren't getting the jobs. Black people weren't getting paid. Yeah, but they were getting paid less than the whites. Now they weren't getting the job, so they weren't getting paid, period. Good job. Way to go. You just worked them out of a job. And then there's the riots. And I'm going to cover this real quick. People say that Detroit, it was racism that hollowed Detroit out. What you notice is white flight didn't happen until the riots.
Ooh.
William Collins and Robert Margo examined the economic impact of the riots on the African Americans in the cities where they took place. They find that the riots had economically significant negative effects on blacks' income and employment. Further, those effects may have been larger in the long run from 1960 to 1980 than in the short run from 60 to 70. Till 1975, the racial gap in average earnings among full-time male workers in the U.S. narrowed until 1975. There were periods of sharp convergence, as in the 1940s, alternating with periods of relative stasis, as in the 50s and 60s. After 70, racial convergence in earnings slowed markedly, in part because low-wage black males were no longer engaged in full-time work. Collins and Margo find a relative decline in median black family income of approximately 9% in cities that experienced severe riots relative to those that did not, controlling for several other relevant city characteristics. There's also some evidence of an adverse effect on adult male employment rates, particularly in the 70s. Between 60 and 80, severe riot cities had relative declines in male employment rates of 4 to 7 percentage points. Individual level data for the 70s suggests this decline was especially large for men under the age of 30, while they were leaving their families with children, while they were leaving women with children. So not only did you have a drop in employment, not only did you have the riots, which chased businesses out, but you had the families splitting apart because the welfare system said, we'll take care of you. Don't worry about him.
Ooh, there you
go. Are we starting to see all of these cumulative effects? Don't just point to racism. There were a lot of factors in play. Racism, I'm sure, played a part. But other examples of other peoples in other areas of the world, they overcame just as nasty of racism. The Jews. I will continue to go back to the Jews. How many industries, and I'm not trying to overgeneralize or sound racist in this comment, how many industries do they basically control?
Oof.
Banking, Hollywood. They're very prevalent in diamond and jewelry business, textile. Like, they're business people. They're great at it. They overcame a lot to do it.
Truth.
Too. You know.
I think government has done this for years, where it's like it uses the one-size-fits-all argument to blanket statements, you know, and the dangers of blanket statements are terrible because you're assuming that that's what it is. Assumption destroys relationships, people, because you're not even operating in a real world. And this is what's happening with this word racism, that now it's just kind of this cliche word. It's becoming kind of part of the lexicon, and it's no longer even effective in a lot of ways because people are like, oh, you know, you get people be like, racism again. I mean, come on. It's like, how many really is it racism? Is it racism to do? You know what I mean?
Everything gets blamed on racism. So therefore nothing's racism.
Exactly. Therefore, you're gonna have to label your problem something else, and it becomes harsher in the end because that term it's losing its effect. So you need a stronger word next time, right? What's gonna happen when they start calling people who are racist supremacists because they've been doing it now, lay it little by little by little. Yep. Then supremacists get turned into attempted murderers or people who hate. You know, look, it's going to keep coming out worse and worse and worse.
All of a sudden, they'll be dehumanized.
That's exactly it. That we need to get rid of them.
Watch for the dehumanization.
And we're prophesying that it won't in Jesus' name, but that's what happens when you do this. So, guys, again, hopefully you learned something from this podcast, go ahead and give it a share. Do us a favor because people are going to need to learn all this stuff, and hopefully we're changing some lives out there with these podcasts, which we know we are. I'm just saying, like, the issues that we're hitting, they're very hard to hit on because who's going to talk about it, really? You know what I mean? Those are very controversial things to talk about, so we want to talk about them because we have answers. And so, guys, again, go to theselfevidenttruth.com, find out more about what we're doing as a ministry. Go on our website. You guys can see that we got a new website out too, and we have a blog spot on the website.
We're making progress.
I am not a contributor to that because I don't write. I just talk a lot. So if you have not subscribed on YouTube and other platforms, please go do that. Apple, go leave us a review, that kind of thing. And if you hate it, it's okay. We love you. So guys, again, tune in next time because we got a lot of times coming up: Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. We are here for you. God bless you guys. We will see you next time.
Love you guys.